Next is the cyborg super soldier Heard from Scott Westerfeld's The Rise in Empire, which came out in 2003. I pronounce her name as Heard, despite it being written H_RD, and the underscore being in her language pronounced as an E with a click sound at the same time, a bit like in, for example, the Xhosa language. And I tried to pronounce it right, but my Western or European tongue just doesn't manage. So I pronounce it the way the Empire faction from the book would have pronounced it. She's the first canonically queer and not disabled character on this list, but her eventual girlfriend is disabled. The book has a really unique and fascinating world building through this being, with the exception of the telepathy of one of the characters, hard science fiction, and so they don't even have faster than light travel. And the space battles are not just two spaceships shooting at each other in a straight line like in Star Trek, but involve a lot of physics and other complicated calculations. It's a space opera following the war between the title-giving Empire and the Rigs. And it's not just a bit difficult to read because of how scientific and complicated the world building is, but also because it has like 15 different point of view characters. The Empire controls around 80 planets, and most of their culture is centered around the Emperor finding a way to resurrect everyone who has made some important contribution to the Empire, which means mostly soldiers, but occasionally also scientists or artists. They do have a Senate too, and while they still have gender and they also have different gender roles on different planets, it doesn't really seem to matter anymore. It doesn't really seem to mean that a person has to have a specific life trajectory or a specific job or anything like that just because of their gender. Then there's the Rigs. They're not so much an empire as they are a religion centered around so-called compound minds, which are these personifications of the internet of an entire planet. Their religion asks of them to sow these compound minds on other planets while also worshipping them as their gods. And they also start out as being completely organic, but then over the span of their lives enhance themselves with more and more machine parts until nothing organic is left and they are part of their planet's infrastructure. The Rigs are also exclusively women, which in the book is justified as them having discarded the useless gender, which is one of the very few instances where it's actually visible that Scott Westerfeld is, as far as I know, a cishet man. It's also not clear if this means that all of the Rigs have two X chromosomes, if they have the exact same genetics as humanity has today, but just no social concept of the gender of being a man, or if they have completely alien concepts of gender that are so alien that their Empire people don't really understand them and just closely approximate them to being women. Regardless, they are not treated like an all-woman species is usually treated. They're not emotional, seductive, feminine, or weak. They're terrifying fighters, they're logical and utilitarian, and they are also described as having pretty much always either very short hair or completely shorn of hair. Heard is one of the commandos they sent after the sister of the Emperor. This chaotic fight is the first scene in the novel, and after it, Heard managed to escape it, but now it is her and the newly awakened compound mind against the military of the entire planet. Her point of view doesn't start right away, but around the 5th into the book. But after that, it becomes one of the 3 most important storylines. I just love so much how Heard is described. She's this 2 meter tall, muscular, mechanical, terrifying force who has an angular, quite brutal looking face, which are all very masculine coded descriptions. And she's also never said as being ugly for this. And she's always just treated as a very beautiful woman. It makes me think of this line from the Cyborg Manifesto. The cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world, because she truly is. She is from a species which has either no or a completely different idea of gender, and she doesn't need to try to fit into any standards because that's not why she was created. The idea of treating technology like religion and culture is also fascinating to me. For the Rigs, being a cyborg is connection, which is also something described in a Cyborg Manifesto. The Rigs are a very collective culture, and as Hurt, for the very first time in her life, finds herself completely alone. It's hard to deal with for her. She sees herself as a part of a rule, which is one reason why the thought of being killed on the mission initially doesn't really scare her. Then she meets Rana Hata. Rana is a militia worker for the Empire, and initially Hurt just wants to steal her identity. In their first interaction, Hurt pretends to be a superior officer to get Rana to follow her. And as Rana, who has a very keen eye for details, notices that she is a Rix, she overpowers her by injecting her with what is essentially a futuristic antidepressant. Rana canonically has bipolar disorder and synesthesia, and because the synesthesia is helpful for her job in surveillance of lots of moving small objects like asteroids, the Empire doesn't really bother to help her with any of this. With how she describes as never quite fitting in and problems with people, and just the way she processes the world around her in a very categorized, rational to deal with her extremely strong emotions way. She also reads as autistic, but I'm not really sure if that is intentional. She knows that Hurt is just using her, but also this is the first time in her life that anybody has tried to help her with her mental illness, and the first time in her life that anybody truly values her skills and listens to her. But the quite clear, honest communication style that made Rana not fit in with the other people in the Empire also connects her to Hurt, because both of them have a quite similar communication style. This reminds me at this theory that autistic people aren't actually that socially deficient. We just have a different communication style and different way of processing to neurotypicals. So if an autistic person tries to communicate with a neurotypical, it's quite more likely that they will misunderstand each other because the way they think is so different. But when two neurotypicals interact, or two autistic people, this gap in communication is gone. I think there have even been studies about this, and I could totally see this. I mean, I also had some autistic people I just didn't understood and who were incredibly annoying, but most of the time I could really feel how I don't have to struggle and contort myself to make myself understandable anymore, but could just talk. Both Hurt and Rana are so lonely and start talking about their lives and their cultures and teaching each other their language, and soon start falling in love with each other. Rana, initially as part of Hurt disguising herself as her, also cuts off her hair and so ends up looking more masculine than she did before meeting her. Through falling in love with Rana, Hurt learns to see herself more and more as her own person, and suddenly understands that she actually wants to live. She doesn't want to die on this honorable mission to protect her god and her religion. There was an interesting thought in the Robots as Trans allegory video that a character who was created for a specific purpose, growing beyond this purpose and becoming their own person, can be seen as a trans allegory. Becoming who you truly are and want to be instead of this very narrow box society has shoved you in. Maybe this is another reason why I love all of these stories of robots and clones and cyborgs gaining back their humanity so much. I also find the contrast between Hurt and Captain Laurent super interesting, because while Hurt is a cyborg, Laurent is a relatively realistic amputee. And unlike most amputees in science fiction, he's not really treated as a cyborg. Despite his prosthesis being able to do things they can't do in real life, for example, sending signals back to his body, but they are still different to his original limbs, and he also takes them off in several scenes. But still, near the end, he expresses that he feels a certain kinship to the Rigs because of how much of his body is machine too. There are so much more fascinating ideas and social criticism in this book in ways that are not connected to this topic. So I can just recommend reading these books. It's absolutely impressive how progressive they are for this time.